Good morning. We are going to be reading a new chapter from our history book today, another one about Julius Caesar. So you've already learned some things about Julius Caesar, one of the most famous individuals in our study of ancient Rome. Do you remember who he was? Well, we learned in our last chapter that he led Rome to a lot of victories, and he even started a civil war within the empire because he and his friend Pompey, who started to become very jealous of all of Caesar's victories, were really at odds with one another. So we'll spend some time reviewing that and then lead into our new chapter where we're going to continue hearing about Julius Caesar and his connection with Cleopatra. Some of you might not have known, but Cleopatra and Julius Caesar lived at the same time and knew each other. So we'll find out about that in our chapter today. Let's go to our history book. Okay. So, skipping over to chapter 5, where we were reading before. So Julius Caesar led them to a lot of victories in war. He was born in 100 BCE, a great speaker, and he did well in government jobs, but also in military positions. And he was leading people to have great amusement, great entertainment. We're going to find out more about the Colosseum and some of the ways that they entertained people in later chapters. But he was friends with Pompey, a very famous general, and he knew a lot of wealthy people within the Senate. And as we already read, he started this civil war by not returning back like he was asked to. And it says if his army crossed the Rubicon, he would be at war with Rome. But if he left his army in Gaul, he would have no protection against his enemies. They would probably kill him. So Caesar decided to fight, and he led his army across the river and started a civil war. So we were reading about that last week. We're going to continue hearing about him now with chapter 6 about Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt. Now, in 48 BCE, Julius Caesar sailed along the Nile River and arrived in Alexandria, Egypt, with a small group of soldiers. Caesar was looking for Pompey. He went to the king's palace, but then he learned that Pompey had died. So let's take a look at the part of the world that we're looking at here. Alexandria, Egypt, is in a different continent altogether. However, it's quite close to the Mediterranean Sea, as is ancient Rome. So they were not, it was far away, but fairly easy for them to travel to one another. That's where we are looking at right now. Now, the king of Egypt had trusted his advisors. They had promised him that Caesar would be happy that Pompey was dead. They were wrong, though. Pompey was a Roman general, and Caesar saw Pompey's murder as an insult to Rome. So now we know what happened to Pompey. People within the Egyptian government had killed him, and they thought that Caesar would be happy because they had started to feud with one another and were even in war with one another in Roman Empire. But Caesar was more loyal to Rome than anything. So he thought that it was terrible for them to kill Pompey because Pompey was Roman. And even if they were not getting along at the moment, he does not want anybody to be part of something like that. Now, Cleopatra. While Caesar was still a guest at the palace, a servant entered carrying a large rolled-up rug. Caesar watched as the rug was unrolled. Cleopatra, the queen of Egypt, was hiding inside. Cleopatra begged Caesar to protect her from her brother, the king. She said the king and his advisors were planning to murder her. Be murdered by her own brother? Now, it took a little while for Caesar to reply. He stared at Cleopatra and listened to her voice. He would certainly protect her. He wanted to keep the beautiful queen near. Cleopatra stayed with Caesar. Now, the king and his advisors were angry that Cleopatra had outsmarted them by escaping. They were also angry that Caesar agreed to protect Cleopatra. They ordered the Egyptian army to surround the palace. They thought this might make Caesar change his mind. But once again, they were wrong. The first time being that they thought he'd be happy about Pompey. Now, Caesar ordered the Roman Empire in nearby Syria to march on Alexandria. Caesar killed the king's chief advisor. The Egyptian king fled from his own palace. When the Roman army arrived, Caesar took command. He easily defeated the Egyptian army. We already know that he is an excellent general. And the king of Egypt died in battle, Cleopatra's brother. Now, Cleopatra was very grateful to Caesar. She asked him to travel through Egypt with her. According to legend, so we don't know if this is true, they sailed up the Nile River on her royal barge, which is, as you can see here, a boat with a flat bottom, usually for carrying goods, like cargo. Caesar learned a lot about Cleopatra on this journey. Cleopatra was actually Greek, not Egyptian. Almost 300 years earlier, the Greek king Alexander the Great, we have Alexander in our class, I know he loves Alexander the Great, had conquered Egypt and built the great city of Alexandria. So Alexander the Great, he conquered Egypt. He has this city of Alexandria built, named after him. Cleopatra was a descendant of one of Alexander's Greek generals. So it's been hundreds of years, but her relatives were Greek as well. Cleopatra studied hard to be a good ruler. She learned about other countries from people who came to study in Alexandria's great library. She also learned to speak many languages. She was the only one in the history of her royal family who could speak to the Egyptian people in their own language. It's very smart of her. She's living in Egypt. Of course, she should know Egyptian, but nobody else was doing that. Now, Caesar came to trust Cleopatra. He did not want to make Egypt a Roman province. He wanted Cleopatra to remain queen of Egypt. So he did not want to make Egypt a Roman province. Remember, a province is land that's been conquered by the Roman Empire, or any empire really. But specifically what we're talking about is if it was conquered by a Roman Empire, the Roman Empire, and then it was still Egypt, but it's under Roman control basically. So he wanted Cleopatra to stay queen of Egypt. He didn't want Roman control there. And he also fell in love with Cleopatra. So maybe that's part of why he wants her to be queen. Caesar, however, was a busy man. He left Egypt to finish the war against Pompey's remaining army. So going back to Rome, he had his time in Egypt, meeting Cleopatra, defending her, killing the king of Egypt, or at least being part of the army who killed them. And now he's got to go back to ancient Rome and fight off Pompey. So that's where we're going to end off. We're going to find out how Julius Caesar dies in the next chapter. Do you think you know what might happen? It's a very famous story. You might have heard little bits and pieces. Maybe by the time we get to it, you'll have been kind of familiar with this, with the story. But we are going to be reading that in a couple of days. And I hope that you're enjoying learning about Julius Caesar. You could dress up as Julius Caesar on Friday for Classical Day if you want to, or Cleopatra as well. So those are, anybody who's really mentioned in our ancient Roman study, and also people who are just general patricians and plebeians and senators can dress up as any of them for our Classical Day. I will talk to you later. Bye.